Hello there, and welcome to the channel. Today we're updating our video on hard surface sculpting inside of ZbrushCore, updated to the 2018 edition. The info you can find in my previous video on hard surface sculpting inside of ZbrushCore is still valid, still has great things to teach you, so I would advise you to watch those as well. I'll have links to those in the comments in the description of this video. But before we jump in the actual video that is going to be sped up because it took 3 hours, and I'm not going to talk for 3 hours since it's mainly going to be the same thing over and over again. If you would like to see things more in real time or have more details, most of the things I will be using in this video I will have already covered in a previous video, so check those out. But we are going to I'm going to make you a quick overview of the main techniques, the main complicated things we're going to be using in this video in real time in this intro. So we are going to append a sphere. We're going to hide this. Okay, so the main thing we are going to be using are different from the main tools that you should know by now inside of ZbrushCore. You will find them either we're going to be using the new deformers from the 2018 edition that are found here inside the 3D gizmo. If you do not have the 3D gizmo, if you have the transform tool, you should activate it here, gizmo 3D, like so, and just hit that little gear icon and you will have access to these deformers. And you can manipulate all these cones to edit those deformers, and we'll see how we use them inside the video. And I have made a video on the deformers and what's new inside of ZbrushCore 2018, so you can have a look at that video if you want to know more. So here, this is where we found our deformers. Once we're done with the tweaks we want to make, you have to hit accept. And if you're not happy, reset or full reset. Like so. So this is something I'll be using over and over again inside the video. I'll be using different deformers, and I'll talk about that inside the main video. And the other thing that I'll be using a lot is Dynamesh. So here under the geometry tab, we're going to hit Dynamesh, and Dynamesh is dependent on the size of your actual model. So here you have a resolution, so you can either bump up the resolution if you don't have enough geometry, or scale up your model. So we're going to subdivide it a couple of times, and then we are going to Dynamesh it. So that way, because when you hit Dynamesh, you're reconstructing the topology on the fly. So you're not actually smoothing anything. So you can have something very faceted but very high pixel count, poly count. So make sure you subdivide it a couple of times so your surface is actually smooth before you Dynamesh it. And what Dynameshing does is, since it will reconstruct the topology on the fly, like so, you can see here we have this weird looking geometry. That's because the surface is reconstructed on the fly, and we'll be using that ability to redo the topology, because that's not something we have many options inside of ZbrushCore. That's one of the limitations of the software. So we're going to append this cube, for instance, and we're going to subtract, let me pick the cube, I'll turn this off. We are going to subtract this cube from this sphere. So we're going to make a cut inside of this sphere using this cube, essentially. So anytime we need to make some complex cuts or shapes inside of ZbrushCore. This is something we'll be using a lot inside of the video. So this is why I'm doing this more in real time. So you take your, this is what you want to edit. You have to make sure that it's in Dynamesh. So it has to be a Dynamesh before you do anything else. This has to be Dynamesh. Then you append something right under the piece you want to edit. Then you do whatever you need to do to make your cut. So you modify, you tweak, you change the shape however you need it to be. Let's turn off perspective. Then you move it into position like so, for instance. And once you're happy with the cut you want to be making, you go here on the right panel and you pick this second icon. So there's a few sets of icons here, and you want to pick the second one. This will tell ZbrushCore that when it needs to redynamesh, this part needs to be subtracted from the other part. So you have to make sure your subtraction is set to this second icon here. Then you go back to your main piece, like so. Go here on the right panel under merge, hit merge down, click OK, and now you've merged both of these together. But we said that this piece needs to be subtracted. So to do so, we need to redynamesh our model. So to redynamesh, hit Control and mask something outside of your model. So here, this will mask our parts of our model inside the rectangle, but here, if our model is not inside of this mask we are creating, it will redynamesh. So we're going to redynamesh like so, and boom, here you go, we've made that cut. So the simple editing gizmo tools that you should know, some sculpting, and a lot of 3D gizmo and subtracting that we've seen inside this intro. And now I'm going to cut here, and I'll see you in the main time lapse. And we're back inside the main time lapse. So here I'm importing a reference image that I'm appending to one of the reference view. I've made a video on setting up your reference inside of ZbrushCore, so have a look at that. And I am doubling the size of my reference so that I have more Dynamesh resolution on my main meshes. So all the meshes are a bit bigger when I work. And now I am appending a shape, and then I'm hitting the 3D gizmo, because inside of the 3D gizmo you can generate some polygons, some new geometry that is better than the appending, the geometry you can append by default. Since you have some control on the resolution, you can set the number of faces you need. Here I am masking bits of the shape and inverting my mask, and then using the gizmo tool as well as the control option, you can extrude some of the faces. As well, this is something I've talked about in a previous video. So this is not very new, but the ability to generate topology and specify the number of faces, this is something new to this video, something we didn't have before. So now, same thing, I'm masking the parts I want to extrude, and then I'm inverting the mask, moving it down with the control key pressed, so I'm making an extrusion. Then I'm scaling uniformly to make a bevel, masking the top of this box and scaling it on the y-axis, scaling down so it has that slope. Masking all the faces of the vertices I want to tweak, and just roughly shaping it. And you can see here we've generated and we have this very, very clean geometry. I subdivided it a couple times with smooth turned off. So you have this button next to your divide option under geometry that smooths the geometry as you divide. If you turn that off, you will divide the surface but keep it very clean. So if you have something you want to keep consistent and do not want to smooth too much, so I've subdivided a couple of times, and then when I had enough geometry to support the hard edges, I turned on smooth so it's not that hard. So the shape is kept. Here I same thing, appended a new subtool, then generated with the 3D gizmo, I generated a cube. Did the same thing here, moving it into position, and here I'm going to make the ammo. So I merged those two together, the little base we've made and that other rectangle, subdivided it a bunch of times. Now I am appending this shape. Well, I think I'm not going to be using that shape. I appended now this cylinder that I am going to move into position like so. And this is going to be, I'm going to make that cutout of the ammo. So I subdivided it a couple of times, and you can see that the top and bottom were deformed by the subdivision. So I went inside the 3D gizmo, the little gear, and there's this deformer called flatten, and you can manipulate the cones on the direction. You pull the cones down and that flattens the top and bottom. So there I had a very smooth cylinder, but I also had this clean flat end bottom. I duplicated it, and then I did this Boolean operation I talked about in the intro. Now I'm hitting the 3D gizmo again, and I am using the bend gizmo, but it's not working like I want. So I'm using the deformer soft, and I'm masking the points I want to manipulate, and then I'm inverting my mask so everything else is hidden. And that way I can tweak specific control points, and that way you can deform your shape, and that's how we're going to give that bent cartoon look we're looking for, and that's something that is new to ZbrushCore 2018. And that way we've generated that ammo pack. There's a bit of deformation on the reference. Some of it is due to that cartoon style, and some of it is due to some perspective. So we're going to eyeball some things. Appended a cylinder, subdivided a couple of times, use that flatten deformer inside the gizmo to flatten those edges to make them clean. Appended a new shape, and then generated a cylinder inside of the Gizmo 3D. So I could give the faces I wanted, the number of faces I wanted. And then I'm using the taper deformer, and I'm tweaking all those values. You can just give it a try and see what each cone does. It's pretty obvious. Here we're going pretty fast. Since the video is sped up, I'm talking pretty fast. But we're going to be doing this over and over and over again inside this video, so eventually you'll get it. And most of these things will repeat themselves, and you can pretty much, if you have the software, if you're looking at it at the same time, you can pretty much once you get the main idea, you can pretty much do it yourself. So here I appended this cube, and then I duplicated it using control and moving the gizmo in the direction I wanted to clone that piece of geometry. So that way I could make all these little shapes, and then I made a big box under it, and I dynameshed everything together so to merge all these little cubes and the big rectangle under it. And then I'm going to use the flatten gizmo here. You can see me clean some of these some of the edges. And then under geometry I hit mirror and weld to make sure everything is symmetrical, and then I'm going to simply redynamesh everything again with polish turned on. Since we're using hard surface geometry here, I'm going to be using Dynamesh quite a bit. Appending a cube, moving it into position, trying to get that slope. Control move to make a clone of it, setting it to subdivide to subtraction, then merge down, redynamesh, and that made the cut. So now we have those nice beveled edges. So yeah, that's the subtraction trick. Here you can see me inside the 3D gizmo picking one of the. So you need to append if you want to generate a new primitive with the 3D gizmo. You need to append a subtool first. So you append any shape you want, then you hit generate a shape. And once you've generated that shape, you hit Gizmo 3D to go out of the shape generation mode. So here I appended the cylinder. I used flatten to flatten one side to match the shape of the stock. Not very good at weapons anatomy, so the stock of the gun. Here, then I flattened it, and then I'm going to hit mirror and weld to make sure both sides are symmetrical. And then I duplicated, since the shape was pretty similar. I control and moved the shape to clone it. Then here we're appending a new box. Then we are going to we give it a bit of resolution. Then using flatten to make sure it's right in the position we want. A lot of subtools. Appended a tool, created a cylinder, then hit Gizmo 3D to manipulate it. Move it into position. Parts of the gun barrel. Duplicate it with control. Scale it down, scale it to make it longer. Control to duplicate it. And then we're going to mask the top, invert the mask, hit control and move to extrude it, scale it down to give it a bevel, then control move to extrude it again, and finish our extrusion. So that's one way to tweak and modify and add geometry to your subtool. So here we are. What are we doing now? Redynamishing something. Oh yeah, we're making that little cut. We appended a box just to make that little indent at the end of the main body of the rifle. There are a lot of things when you're making something like this. There are a lot of little pieces you need to make. So just tackle them one at a time. Start working on blocking out all the big shapes, and then move on to making little details and cuts. Here I'm appending a sphere because I want to make that little weird shape at the end. So appended a sphere, then I am using the flatten gizmo to flatten those shapes. I want to keep the round parts at the end, trying to make it symmetrical. So I'm using Shift key, subdivide it a couple of times. Then I'm going to delete lower so that way I can use the gizmo 3D, use deformer soft, so like previously, masking and inverting my mask to edit specific points. And then I'm going to move it into position. If it's not perfectly symmetrical, we can always hit mirror and weld. Fix that later on. That's why I appended my my reference view to the side view and not the front view, so that way I can use symmetry on the x-axis. Appending a new box. Making this longer, then duplicating it and moving it down, because I wanted to clone just that main cylinder, and I'm going to be using that because there's a bit of a round shape on parts of that lower piece of metal on the main body, so I wanted to keep those round shapes on the bottom, and there's no need to create something perfectly new if you can just duplicate a shape you already have. Then I am appending a box to it, control and moving it into position, so that way we can have that round part at the rear and where the trigger is. And once we are done, we'll dynamesh everything together to make it one unique mesh. We'll use the 3D Gizmo flatten deformer to make sure the faces are perfectly flat and clean. So we can clean that up later. It's not an issue. It's a pretty, this is the most, the handle, the trigger part, and the body here is the most complex part of the modeling phase. Has a lot of intricate shapes that go in various directions, so you have to think of how you're going to make those cuts. So I appended the cylinder here, set it to subtract, and then merge down and redynamesh to make that cut. Here there's this little indent I can see on the reference. So I pick the primitive that was matching the closest, deformed it to the shape I need. Then we're going to set it to subtract, mirror and weld, so we can make the cut on both sides at the same time. Made a mistake, so I have to do it again. Was subtracting too high, so lower it down. Mirror and redynamesh to make the cut, like so. Flatten deformer to get rid of the excess geometry on the bottom. Merge down those two pieces together so they're one uniform piece, and you can see there's where the seam was, there's a bit of noise that shows off that they were two different pieces at one time, but we're going to clean that up with the flatten deformer so it's not really an issue. Here I'm going to try and make all the cuts I need. Trying to match that little curve at the end. Using the bend deformer, trying to see if I can make that. Setting to subdivide. Merge down. It's not too bad, but it's not great. Trying to make a bigger cut. Making it two-piece. Want to make a first make that round part and then have it more linear towards the end. So making that piece, trying to set it so that the bottom of the piece is horizontal, so that way I can make a clean selection and then control move to extrude the end, so that way this part is a bit longer. So merge down. It's not perfect, but the intent is there. Now I'm going to append the box, subtract it like so, and we have something that is closer, if not perfect, that is closer to what we need. Duplicated this shape and moved it down since it was close to the shape I needed. Again, no need to reinvent the wheel every time. I'm trying to make it fit, but it's not. So we are going to use the deformer soft, and we are going to scale down the middle points like so, so it's not it's a bit less rounded, a little more box shaped. I am increasing, so you can manipulate the cones to give you more control points, and the more control points, the better the shape will be preserved when you move the other points. The more resolution you give yourself, the more control points you have, the more refined the tweaks and shapes you can you can make. So here I wanted to edit specific points and not affect everything, so I added more points, but you can just modify that deformer box on the fly. Sometimes it's best to have very little reference points. Sometimes it's good to have a lot of them. So you manipulate those cones. They are on specific axis, so you can move the cone up and down on a specific axis if you want to add more or less points to manipulate. Here I'm trying to make that rail be an actual rail. It's hard because I'm working with only one reference view. It's not something you should really do. But I thought about it and I figured out it was a rail, so it had to have an indent somewhere where you can actually add extensions on top of it. So I made it a railing and not a weird shape thingy. Here I'm going to make the, what's it called? Trigger guard. Subdivided with smoothing turned on, so it rounded the corner off. That's something I needed. Deleted the subdivision level so we can actually use the 3D gizmo modifiers. Lowered down the resolution of the deformer soft because I didn't need as much resolution, but kept a bit of resolution on the whatever axis I need, so I could have more control points on the bottom to create that shape. Then I have appended this cylinder, control masked, then control moved to extrude parts of it to make it a little bit wider. Use the flatten deformer to clean off that edge at the end. The deformer 3D to really refine that extrusion shape. Click accept, subtract it. So set it to subtract, merge down, redynamesh. Have to make sure that the model you're merging down is actually already set to Dynamesh. And that's our trigger guard. We're going to duplicate our trigger guard and just scale it and move into position, and that's going to give us our trigger. These shapes are pretty similar. So again, no need to reinvent the wheel every time. Use the sculpting tool. This is a sculpting software, so you're supposed to use the sculpting tool. So I use the move tool to round off to edit the end of this main body part. Here we're going to be using actually a lot of sculpting. So this is the maybe the least mechanical looking hard surface part of the gun, the handle. So we're going to be sculpting most of it. Move it into position, Dynamesh it, then use the deformer soft to roughly give the shape we need. Turn on symmetry. It's going to make things a lot easier. And with the clay build-up brush, I'm starting to carve in, carve out. I'm starting to carve the shape of the handle. Then with hard polish, I'm trying to clean that up. Trying to round off. Not sure of the shape, the actual volume, just looking at the reference. So I'm trying to make it inside of Fortnite, because this is a Fortnite weapon. I don't know if I said it, but it's a clickety bait subject on YouTube. But yeah, it's a Fortnite weapon, so it's a stylized weapon. It's a stylized take on a more realistic weapon. But since it's stylized, it's a subject matter that is more appropriate to ZbrushCore. If you were going to do something hyper realistic, maybe ZbrushCore is going to make it a little bit harder. So since we're going for this stylized look, Fortnite, it's easier to it's more forgiving. You can unlock here. You can see me locking and unlocking the gizmo. So you have this little lock, and that allows you to orient the 3D gizmo in any given position. So I needed to reset the. You can unlock and hit reset to put the gizmo orientation back the way it was. So that way I could flatten along specific axis. So if you need to flatten along a specific orientation, you might need to unlock the 3D gizmo, orient it the angle you need, lock it back again, and then use the flatten. That way you can make planes along specific axes. This is axis. English is hard. Not really, but still. So here with the hard polish, I'm smoothing parts of the handle. Trying to think of comfort in a way. Might not be very comfortable to have a hard edge inside the palm of your hand. So rounded the outer corners a bit. Looking at what we need, what needs to be done. Weird organic shape again. Maybe not organic, but you know. Weird shape. Flatten gizmo. Scale it down. Dynamesh it. Flatten again. Deformer soft. Going to try and match that shape. So I gave myself more control points. Then append the cube, so we're going to make that clean cut at the end. Move into position, set it to subtract, merge down, redynamesh. We're going to hit mirror and weld because it was a bit thick on one side. Symmetry got broken off at one point. Easy enough to fix. Same thing over and over again. Append the cube, move it into position, subtract it, That way they gave us that clean cut. We have a lot of subtools, so anytime you can, if you can, try to merge them down together when you're done, or trying to rename some of them. Especially if you're going to be using this to make a game model later, you want to have them properly renamed, so that way you know what part of the gun is your high poly, if you want to bake it to a lower polygon version later on. Duplicating that part. Trying to guess exactly what I'm looking at. It's not very clear to me what it is on the reference. So I'm making a guess. You can have the if this was a concept art, and you could ask the concept artist to tell you what it is good, but it's most of the times it's also good to make some educated guesses to parts that are not seen, so that way if you're good at it, if a concept artist gives you concept art but there's only one view, rather than asking him to tell you everything that is on the other side, you can make an educated guess, and if you're pretty good at it, you can save a lot of time. So here we're using the deformer soft again, giving ourselves some control points to give the shape we need. Roughing that position. Appending a box, then control drag, control and move to clone it. Set it to subtract. Start again for some reason. Wasn't happy. Up, dynamic shit. Append the box. Move it into position. Using hard polish to clean that up. Duplicate the subtool because we're going to make a cut inside. It is roughly the same shape, so we duplicated it and then scaling it down. That's a bit too much, so we want to make it a bit thicker. So append the box. Use the taper, and you can edit the opacity to call it, so you can affect, if you want, it will taper uniformly, but you can also then specify on which axis you don't want it to taper, so that way we could preserve the y-axis. Gives us a cleaner cut. here we can see that there's this big screw part. So we made a screw axis. You can see me watching YouTube as I was working. We're going to make that nozzle, so we duplicated that cylinder. That was already pretty good. Then we are going to dynamesh it because we're going to be using the subtract method to make that nozzle shape. Here I'm going to try and move it into position and then mirror and weld, but it's not going to give me the result I was hoping for. So I'm going to just having a bit of difficulty to grabbing the handle. So I'm going to duplicate it, then turn it the opposite direction, then merge down, then set it to subtract, then merge down, then redynamesh, and that's how we get that nozzle shape cut. Then we are going to append a cylinder. Move into position. So our rounded parts at the bottom and the edge, we're cleaning those up. Not sure it was very useful. Taper it a little bit to match the shape better. Set it to subtract. Move it under the part we want to subtract. Then merge them down and subtract. And that way that gives us our nozzle shape. So you have to, you have to think about, you have to think about how you can use the tools you have to make complex shapes and cuts. Here I saw that on the reference, this was supposed to match the shape and cut of the other part of the body of the rifle. So I appended this cube. And then I'm going to use Deformer Soft and set it to the minimum amount of control points. So that way I'm essentially editing a cube, giving it a slope. And now I'm going to try and match the slope of the main body. So I'm moving it into position, scaling it, trying to match the slope, like so. Moving it into position, scaling it wider than the cut we need, mirror and weld. Merge down, and that way we have this cut that matches the shape of the body. And for some reason the symmetry was lost. Mirror and weld should fix it. And that way we have this nice slope and cut that matches the rest of the gun barrel, the gun body. So I'm guessing there should be some way to actually aim inside of this. So I'm adding this little shape. That way when you look down the sight, you can actually have something to aim to. Not sure it actually looks like that. looking at it from the side, trying to make sure I'm not too far off. Append a cylinder just to go into the 3D gizmo and generate another cylinder, because the cylinders you can generate from the Gizmo 3D are actually more usable for sculpting and editing. Subdividing a couple of times so it's a bit rounder, and then control and mask to make it thicker but not uniformly thick. Then tapering it down, flattening it down, control, select the upper part, control move to make the bevel like we did previously. So now we have this nice hard and crisp edge. Then we're going to simply set it to be a Dynamesh because we're going to make a subtraction later. So append this rectangle, trying to match the angle, the thickness we need, set it to subtract, then merge down and re-Dynamesh. And that way we have this big giant screw thing that is on the reference image. We're going to mirror it well to make sure it's on both sides. Then there's this, I'm guessing, second part of the site. Subdivide it a couple of times. Same thing. Using the deformer soft, a little less control points because I don't need as many. Trying to match the view. So I'm guessing it's supposed to be like this. So it's a V shape. You're supposed to align with the front bar of the rifle. Not very qualified. not very good at weapons anatomy. Making a cut, so we have this nice V shape. But I think it should be something like that. Actually played the game a couple of times, so I think it looked like that. And most of the main shapes are there. Just have to do a bit of house cleaning, duplicating some parts, deleting them. Yeah, I wanted to separate the end of that stock, so I duplicated the subtool and then deleted what was not necessary in each subtool to separate them. And then I'm going to append a box, make it wider than the shape we're subdividing from, tapering that end, but not with taper, just with the deformer, hitting control and moving down to clone that shape a couple of times. And then we're going to, every time you clone, I'm going to use auto groups with polygroups, and so that way I can jump to every different clone part of the edit, trying to match the reference view because they seem to be varying width, and I think that is due to the cartoon style. Dynamesh everything together so it's one big uniform piece, then set it to subtract, and we're going to Dynamesh and subtract it from the stock. Move it, yeah, make the cut a little bit deeper, and that gives us our stock. It's not something I'm going to do, but I think I made things a little bit too straight to actually match the aesthetic of Fortnite in the end. But I think if you, because I wasn't sure what was deformed due to the perspective and what was deformed due to the actual style of the game. So I think you could just take the whole model and then just use the deformer soft to make it slightly more cartoony, deform it slightly on the Z axis to make it a little less straight. So here appended a sphere, scaled it, and then used the flatten deformer to build that shape. Essentially, you have to be smart with the tools you have. So break down the things into primitives. What's the closest primitive you could use, and then start from there, and then edit that primitive to match what you need. So here I'm going to, I created that little bevel like we did previously, and then I'm going to use that to carve those 3 little dots. And merge and mirror weld that so it's on both sides of the gun. So I think that is something that's supposed to be on both sides of the gun. I think. Trying to look at it in every direction just to make sure I'm not too far off. We're starting to have a lot of subtools. So here it would be a good idea to merge everything down to their actual material. So everything that would be black would be the same subtool. That would be a little bit more manageable. So you have that black steel, then that orangey ochre color steel. Control and move to duplicate it, mirror and weld so it's on both sides. Set it to subtract and mirror down and merge down and redynamesh. That's going to give us our little cuts on the side of the main body. So I used to generate a box, but it made it very small, so I had to scale it back up. Mask the end, invert the mask, control and move to extrude a shape and bevel it down. Rename this the main body so it's easier to find in the list. Make sure it's dynameshed. And then we're going to use the subtract method to make that cut for that I don't know, bolt action thing on the side. Here I'm inserting, adding a little bit of extra geometry. It's not maybe super useful. I'm adding geometry for the, I made the hole for the slider, and now I'm adding a cylinder, a rectangle inside of that hole. I'm actually putting a cylinder in a rectangle inside that indent. That way, if I wanted to make a bake of it for a game or something, I could. It's easier to poly paint. It's easier to manipulate, and that way I can animate it. You could just leave that hole and painted the hole inside, but might as well. So appended cylinder, flatten the edge, try to flatten the top and bottom, but wasn't very useful. Mask the edge, move into position, Dynamesh with polish turned on, and scale up. And that gives us our little thing to activate the slider. Now we're going to make that little maze-like shape. Not sure what that is. Not sure what function this has. Maybe it's something to... I don't know. I don't know what it is. So I'm going to call it the little maze on the side. So I made this shape, this rectangular, this rectangle, and then I'm going to see how I can create shapes to subtract from. So I duplicated the shape, and then I masked a few polygons on the side to extrude from. Set it to Dynamesh. That way we can subtract that. Append a new box to make those two little cuts. So set to subtract and subtract. Scale down, move into position, mirror and weld. I think this is supposed to be on both sides, not sure. I'm guessing the bolt action thing on the side is supposed to be on only the anti-jam thing. It's supposed to be on the just on one side. So the rest I'm just going to move into every possible side. That's the safety. Yeah. So I make the sphere, flatten it, then I'm going to append this box, subdivide it a couple of times, then use the deformer soft to give it a useful shape. Hit accept. Let's get into position. Merge down. And then just move it into position. Give it a bit of an angle to match the reference. Name this. Now we are going to flatten a sphere like so, and we are going to try and make a screw. We're going to append a star. And that way we're going to move the star, we're going to put it into position. That way we are going to fake the screw head. So it's going to be a star shaped screw. yeah, 500,000 poly for a screw is a bit too much, so we're going to scale it down and dynamesh it. So now it's 80,000 polygons. I'm going to turn off dynamesh to make sure we do not dynamesh it again. And now we are going to move them all into position, and we're going to turn some of them at different angles, move them into position individually like so, and mirror and weld, and that's going to give us our screws. And it's going to look like screws. It's not going to be a standard screw head, but the illusion is good enough. It's better to have something there than not, and it's a pretty fast way to do so. Going to mask where there's a bit of texture on the grip, and we're going to use the noise plugin and we're going to play with the scale to give it a bit of texture. And then we are going to use the diamond standard brush to make a cut around that shape. There's a bit of a transition in material. I'm going to smooth out the outer part of the cut so none of that texture is showing off. And it's starting to look pretty good. Merging some pieces down like you should, and then I'm going to merge everything together because I don't need to have such a clean file for just a YouTube video, but this is definitely something you should be doing. So I'm going to save a copy, merge everything together and save, and then I'm just going to give it a quick poly paint. And that is going to wrap things up for this video. So I hope you found this useful. Please do check the other videos on the channel if you want to learn more things. If you have questions on something, I've done quite a few videos, so it's very likely things have already been answered in a previous video. If you have any questions or comments, please do feel free to leave them in the comment sections. If you found this video useful and if you want to see more, please do subscribe if you haven't already. I have links down below if you're interested in finding some base meshes for your work and so on. I have those right in the description below if you buy something that helps the channel. If you share this video, that helps the channel. If you like it, share it, comment. Everything of that helps and keeps me motivated to make other videos. If you have any questions or specific things you want covered, please do leave them in the comments. That gives me ideas for new videos. So if you want to see something specific covered, the comment section is a good place to do so. And yeah, that's gonna wrap things up for this video. I hope you found this useful, and I will see you guys in the next one.